I'm with the founder and CEO of Tusk Venture Partners, the former campaign manager to Mayor Mike Bloomberg, and a longtime friend of Demo Day, Bradley Tusk. Bradley, thanks for the time.
Hey, sure. Thanks for having me.
Also, the author of Obvious in Hindsight, and I would be an idiot not to have you sign this copy. Even though it's already signed, I have a Sharpie here in my pocket.
I will inscribe it to you.
And I would love if you would just write something along the lines of, to Jackson, my dear friend.
You taught me everything I know.
And future portfolio company to Tusk, just, anything that comes to your mind, Bradley. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like a celebrity sighting right now, man.
Not exactly, but.
I'm just getting actually personalized.
There we go.
Thank you. Sorry, go on. You're going to say.
Yeah.
Speaking of books, you have P&T Knitwear in the Lower East Side, your bookstore. Do you have a desert island book if you had one book to read the rest of your life?
That is a really great question because, I read a ton and I read mainly stuff that comes out in a pretty contemporary way. So it would really have to be something that you could kind of keep gleaming from. And in a weird way, and I'm not making this my answer, but I kind of wonder if the Bible might not be your best bet.
If you're on a desert island?
Yeah, only because one, you probably need all the faith you can get. And two, there's a theory that basically every story in literature and everything else that's ever come out basically originates somewhere in the Bible.
Yeah.
Now, I typically find the Bible pretty boring to read, like I think most people do. But, as opposed to reading sort of the same novel over and over again, I might try that.
That's funny. As a Christian, that's probably my favorite book I got to go with every single time. So I like your answer a ton. Bradley just wrapped up a New York Tech Week event at P&T Knitwear.
We did.
And I'm curious for VCs, what value does New York Tech Week really provide to someone like yourself? Is it the networking opportunities? Is it just meeting new people?
I think it's some networking. It's more marketing, right? I think for us, being a New York fund and kind of a hopefully pretty visible New York fund.
Right.
And simply, there are certain things that are easier for us to probably do than most funds. And I think putting together an event that is interesting and has good content is not that hard. And we own the venue already. Right. And I do some sort of public thing pretty much every day, one way or another. So you put it all together, and it wasn't all that hard put together. And it, if nothing else, gave us a chance to highlight one of our portfolio companies in Odyssey.
100%. You mentioned New York, and I'm curious, do you think that New York ever has the opportunity to surpass Silicon Valley as the tech hub of the world? Or do you think it's always going to be the Bay Area?
I would say the things that we would need would be a more dominant engineering program. When Mike Bloomberg tried to build, or he did build, a tech campus on Roosevelt Island, the idea was to bring a version of Stanford to New York City. In fact, it literally was going to be Stanford, and then Stanford backed out, and it is Cornell and Technion, which is an Israeli school, instead. So if they start producing tremendous numbers of really talented entrepreneurs and engineers who are creating great companies, I think there's some potential there. The other one, and this is small, but an issue that I happen to be working on right now, which is New York City is one of the only places in the world that when you rent an apartment, you not only have to pay the first month's rent and security deposit, you have to pay a broker's fee that could be as much as 15% of the year's rent. And so, if you're a regular person in your 20s trying to come to New York and build something, you've got to have, 20, 30 grand in cash on hand just to cover the 2 months of the rent and the broker's fee. And I think a lot of really smart people and talented people don't come here simply because they just can't afford to do that. And so, there's actually legislation in the New York City Council right now that would ban it. There's a hearing on it next week. I've been running some campaigns out of Tusk Philanthropies to try to help pass the bill. And I think we've got to make New York economically feasible, affordable, hospitable, if we're going to want more and more founders here.
Is that something your fund might try to do to lure either engineers or future founders to New York City by saying, hey, we'll cover the broker's fee as long as you relocate to somewhere closer to our office or New York?
Not the fund, because we're not like, our mandate is to help companies sort of overcome regulatory roadblocks, but not in a New York specific way.
Got it.
And I think ultimately, paying everyone's broker's fees would get pretty expensive pretty fast.
Yeah.
A lot better off just passing a law to get rid of the broker's fees in the first place.
The conversation around regulation and your name, Bradley Tusk, kind of go hand in hand in this space. And a lot of people say that regulation slows innovation. I'm curious, whenever you face regulatory markets in the space that you invest in, do you ever get upset with how the government or Congress or even at the local level, New York State is considering regulation? How does your relationship with that work?
Sometimes, but I don't know that, look, it can slow innovation, and I think like autonomous vehicles is a really good example of that. But I think oftentimes it's more that it just lags innovation, because by definition, if the bureaucrats who make the regulations could develop disruptive new technologies and build giant companies out of that, they would do that instead. Right. And so ultimately, a founder has to come up with an idea, build the product, show product market fit, gain usership. All of these different things have to happen to get to a point where it even gets on the regulator's radar screen to begin with, and then they try to figure out what's the right regulatory framework. And I think my frustration typically isn't even the fact that they want to regulate. It's when they are regulating in a way solely to protect the entrenched interest in a space over innovation and over new startups. So one of the reasons why, for example, autonomous trucking has not really moved forward is for the last 7 years, the U.S. Department of Transportation has just sat on its hands simply at the behest of the Teamsters. And in this case, Trump saw himself as a Teamsters guy, and Biden sees himself as a Teamsters guy. And so as a result, no one wants to upset a special interest. And so a business that could be really meaningful, and by the way, also save a lot of lives and reduce the cost of commerce and trucking and shipping and goods and everything else, is all being held up because of corrupt, entrenched politics. So my frustration is more when regulators are picking sides and trying to keep the genie in the bottle than the fact that they're regulating it all.
Speaking of Trump and Biden, who do you think venture capitalists are voting for more in this November election?
I mean, there's a couple of different ways to look at it, right? So from a super macro, if you assume that the best state of the world is probably the best state for your business, then Biden is a more predictable bet, right? Trump is, I think even his biggest supporters would say, is a wild card. At the same time, while it's not Biden's fault, I can't really point to anything that Biden has done specifically to cause this to happen. The overlap between Biden's tenure and liquidity has basically been complete, in that there's been no liquidity at all during the Biden administration. So I think when venture capitalists think back, like when were times good and when were they bad, they happened to be better during Trump. That's not necessarily because of anything that Trump did to make them better or Biden did to make them worse, but we did enjoy a really good market in that period, and we've had a really bad market for venture ever since. And so I think you're seeing more VCs, just like more Americans in general, saying, well, my life seemed better off back then. The other thing is I think VCs, including me, are all looking for some sort of catalyst to open the market, right? We know that there are, hundreds of companies that seem ready to IPO, but they're kind of waiting for the opportune moment. We know that interest rates at some point will hopefully come down, but they haven't just yet. And there's going to be something, I think, that breaks the dam. It could be interest rates. It could be that a few companies finally just bite the bullet and move forward and the IPOs do well. Or it could be the election. And I think the re-election of Biden, even if I would argue that is better for the country and for the world, is not going to be the catalyst that's going to all of a sudden open up the venture market and create liquidity. Whereas you could argue that the election of Trump could be that, especially as sort of new regulators at the SEC and the FTC and other places get put into place.
Bradley, you meet with a lot of founders every single day, a lot throughout the week. What's a cliche that you hear way too often that makes you cringe hearing from a potential portfolio company founder?
That's a really good question. One is that everybody is so sure that the market is much bigger than we think it is. And it's sort of like, my investment analysts and associates are pretty good at their jobs and they know how to research a TAM. And I would much rather a founder just be honest and say, okay, maybe this one isn't the biggest market, but this is a winner-take-all business, and here's why I can be that winner, so that's why you should bet on me, instead of trying to convince us. Generally speaking, you're never better off trying to convince someone of something they know not to be true, right? Yeah. You're better off if you can't make the facts line up with what you would like to say, then you've got to realign what you're saying to show that it can work anyway, right? And so I think we get that on TAM a lot, and I think also there just becomes this, reliance or blind faith in certain buzzwords that, now founders think if they use just the phrase AI over and over and over
we have
again.
all these,
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because even within the world of AI, there are startups that are being created right now that are finding product market fit and are succeeding. And like most startups in most industries, most AI startups will fail as well. And so you've got to be able to go deeper than that. And then I guess the last thing I hate is sort of when founders try to create some version of scarcity by sort of just dropping lots of names about all the big shots and other funds and everyone else.
We met with so-and-so at whatever firm. We were just talking to them and they want to be in the round. So.
Right. And it's like, you know what? If
you know all these people anyway. So.
Right. And it's one of two things. Either if you didn't need money at all, we probably wouldn't be having this call, because you should be building your business, not pitching me. Yep. Or you need us because of the regulatory issues, in which case we're one of one, right? And it doesn't really matter what Sequoia is doing, what Andreessen doing, or anything else. By the way, if you look at whatever track record has come out over the last few years, especially when it comes to DPI, a lot of the bigger, more historic funds are not performing particularly well. So the fact that there's 1 or 2 or 5 brand names in the fund isn't necessarily something that makes me then all of a sudden want to invest and be involved.
Bradley, you're a jack of all trades, master of everything. It seems from investing, philanthropy, your Tusk strategies, and even, I think people don't know this as well. What is it? The Hall of Very Good.
Oh the Hall of Very Good Players.
Yeah,
that was
very
a fun
good
little
players.
thing we created.
I still enjoy that. I like the idea a lot. I think there's a lot of those kind of players in my mind that I think of. But what is there a next thing for you? Another endeavor that you're going to be chasing here in the near future?
There's a few things that I'm working on. As you know, mobile voting is something that is really important to me. I've got a book about mobile voting coming out September 17th, and then next year we will actually release the voting tech that we've been building for the last couple of years. It will be free and open source, and then we've got to pass legislation in every state that will actually allow people to use it. So that's a big one. As you noted before, I wrote a novel last year. There's an effort to make it a TV show.
No way.
So I worked.
Will you be starring in the show possibly?
Definitely not.
Not even a cameo?
Maybe a cameo. But
I got to have the guy behind the idea of the show.
I did write the pilot.
Obvious in hindsight, that one?
Yes.
Wow.
And have you ever heard of a guy named Steven Soderbergh? He's a movie director.
Yeah.
So he and I are working together on this.
You're joking.
Buckley.
Wow.
And so they're talking to different actors about casting it. And
okay. Do you want to name drop any of the actors possibly?
I'll probably get in trouble if I do.
We'll talk offline about that.
I'll tell you offline. But if that were to come to fruition, I would write the season, and that would be a lot of fun. I think, as you know, I teach at Columbia Business School. I've taught a class the last 4 years called the Politics and Economics of Disruption. I am going to teach a new class next year called How to Sell Ideas. Okay. And so we are in the final stages to put the syllabus together for that right now. So, there's always, new things that we're working on. Plus we're, raising a new fund and lots of other things too. And then I have found myself getting more and more involved in some local issues here, whether it's trying to close illegal weed shops or pass new regulation on social media to protect minors, or eliminate brokers' fees for rentals, or amend the city charter. And so, I manage to keep busy.
You do everything, I feel like, at all times.
We also announced the Gotham Book Prize winner today.
Oh, no way.
Colson Whitehead, a book named Crook Manifesto.
Okay.
So the Gotham Book Prize is, I think is a prize that we give out every year to the best book that comes out that is either set in New York City or about New York City, fiction or nonfiction. And the great writer Colson Whitehead wrote a book about Harlem in the 1970s called Crook Manifesto.
I got to start reading it.
And it won, and we announced it this morning, and we will have a ceremony tonight.
That's going to be incredible. And it seems like, since you do
that's why I'm wearing
that's
a suit.
Why you look so nice today.
Yeah,
Don't y'all see that?
I've got to give a speech,
you have to stay energized, throughout the day. What's your morning routine to get you to where you are now?
In a good morning, and this doesn't happen every morning, but there's some combination of coffee and reading the newspapers. In a perfect morning, I'll read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New York Post, and the New York Daily News. And then I look at a bunch of newsletters and things like that as well. I exercise, I meditate for 20 minutes, I pray, I walk the dog, get my kids ready for school, whatever else I need to do, and then kind of get out.
There's coffee somewhere in there, right?
Yeah, coffee is sort of the first thing. Yeah, I can't really do anything without it. And so, do I get all of those things in every morning? No. Like, for example, this morning, I didn't get meditation in, right? And there are some days where I don't get a workout in or whatever it is. But, if I can do a combination of those things, it generally gives me, some of the energy that I need. But also, now that I'm 50, a lot of it is just about taking care of myself more broadly. And so, what does that mean? That
anti-aging.
I'm not really working that hard on like my telomeres.
Yeah.
But I would say that, I try to exercise pretty much every day, and I try to eat pretty well, and I try to meditate, and I am working to try to get more sleep. And I treat my body pretty well. I don't drink, I don't smoke. I know all of that, gives me kind of enough health, enough vitality to take on lots of different things in the venture and tech world, and the political world, out of my foundation, to write and create stuff. And so, I'm doing my best to stay on top of all of it.
Last question, Bradley. You mentioned how often you write, you do your podcast Firewall, you seem to do a lot of things in media, whether it's going on CNBC, Bloomberg podcasts, other people's podcasts, et cetera.
Sure.
How important, one, is media to venture capitalists? And two, we're a media company, Demo Day. Is there room or space for us in the venture capital world as a venture investment? Or is the world of investing in media kind of over?
So, I think that the world of investing in media isn't and shouldn't be over. The world of people just buying into hype cycles that don't necessarily have business models to justify it is hopefully over, right? Okay. So when a BuzzFeed or a Vice, had these obscene valuations that weren't really backed by any legitimate math, that's a problem. But look, at some point, someone a lot smarter than me is going to come up with a new business model for media, and that's going to do incredibly well, and hopefully that'll be you. And then for me, earned media is really critical for a few reasons. First and foremost, it generates tons of deal flow for us because people see me on TV, or they hear me on my podcast or someone else's podcast, or they read my books or whatever it is. It creates real validation. So when I'm talking to a founder, if they've seen me on Squawk Box talking about healthcare tech or social media regulation or crypto, even if their company is totally different, they're just like, oh, this guy knows what to do.
Sure.
Kind of credibility that sets in. And also, all the different things I do, from venture to politics to the philanthropy, writing, bookstore, everything else, everything kind of feeds into everything else. So it's a tech cliche, but there's kind of a virtuous cycle of all different things that I work on, and as each of them gets attention, it enhances all the rest of the things too.
Bradley, I really appreciate your time today, man.
Of course.
Thanks always.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.
Cool.